Well, after that introduction, supposing I blow it, that's going to be awful, isn't it? So I'm going to start with a story. A few weeks ago, I was at another conference, which was in California. It's the Star West Conference, and that is run at the Disneyland Hotel in Anaheim. So it's right next to Disneyland. And consequently, the conference is interesting because you've got software testers walking around, but also people dressed as chipmunks and Goofy and Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse and things. It's quite surreal. Anyway, some of you will have been in Rob's tutorial earlier this week where he talked about disk profiles. And if you look at my disk profile, there are certain things that are very strong on it. And I think one of the things that's very strong on it, on my disk profile, is the area of personality, which is very much about wanting to check things, attention to detail, what's happening in a particular process, how things work, whether things are being done correctly. Does that all sound quite familiar? Maybe some of you are like that as well. It's a reasonable sort of personality trait to have if you're a tester, the need to look at things in detail and know whether they're right or wrong. So I was walking down towards the Disneyland entrance, and they now have security that you have to go through as you go through into downtown Disney. And there's lots of little children dressed up for Halloween, as you can imagine, with their parents, and they're all going in families, very sweet. And I see on the security booths, there's a list of rules about what you're not allowed to take into downtown Disney and Disneyland. And some of it is very obvious and sensible, so that, you know, you're not allowed to take weapons in. You're not allowed to take explosives. So you can imagine, that's, yes, people are nodding. That seems sensible, doesn't it? You could put a little bracket there to say, was it necessary to tell people that? But, you know, that's a rule. And then there was a rule in the middle of this list that said, people over the age of 14 will not be admitted if they are in costumes. Oh, yes, well, I mean, you may think that, but I looked at that rule, and then I looked at the queue going into downtown Disney, and there's adult men dressed up as the Hulk. There's women dressed up as Wonder Women. And I'm looking at this thinking, the security people aren't going to let them in. There's going to be a fuss when that group gets to the front of the queue. Surely they're going to get turned away. But no, they were all being let in. You can go in dressed as Dracula, you can go in dressed as Captain Wonderful, you can go in dressed as Snow White, you can go in dressed as anything, at any age. And inside me, there was this terrible feeling of frustration and anger because there's a rule and people are breaking it. I was furious. And I was with a couple of friends who are also software testers, and I was saying to them, look, they're letting people in. So we're going down this queue, there's a lot of normal people behaving normally with their children, and this adult kicking up like a 3-year-old saying, well, they can't do that, they're not allowed to do that, they're letting people in, they shouldn't be letting people in. So then I calmed down a little before we got to the security guards, and I managed to say to them, why are you letting people in? I've checked your process and you're not following it, which wouldn't have gone down well. And I realized, of course, there's a reason for that rule, and there's a reason you can break it. The rule's there, so that if somebody comes up who's an adult who's dressed quite inappropriately for Disney, possibly too frightening, possibly too sexualized, some such thing like that, then the security guards have a rule where they can say, you can't come in. But most of the time, you can break the rule because the risk is so low. That was, you know, that's something that happens for me quite a lot, that my perception of risk doesn't necessarily fit with other people's perception of risk. My animation has not worked on the new laptop. Never mind. It's all come up at once. So let's think about risk, and let's think about its opposite. So if we look at risk, we associate that word with danger. Risks are bad. Often we talk about preventing risks, reducing risks, providing information about risks so that people won't release the software. And there's also the concept of gambling. You know, gambling can be dangerous, it can be addictive, people lose a lot of money. There's no statistical, rational reason for gambling. There's no reason for getting a lottery ticket or putting some money on a bet on the horses or using a slot machine. You're going to lose over time. We all know, mathematically, sensibly, it's a stupid thing to do. And it's dangerous for some people. But actually, maybe it's a little bit harmless. Oh, a little flutter. I just took £10 with me and I bet it on this horse, and that was all I did. Maybe that's okay. Maybe it's not dangerous. We think of risk in terms of threats, things that are going to go wrong definitely. However, for many people, a risk actually means an opportunity or the freedom to do something or a challenge. My younger brother was a rock climber, a mountaineer. He loved that idea that you had the challenge of how you got up a mountain, the challenge of how you address this rock face safely. That lovely talk this morning about explore like Bear Grylls. You know, Bear Grylls is taking risks. If you told him he was not to take any risks, he wouldn't go exploring. So sometimes, for some people, risks are a good thing. So let's look at the other side, the opposite of risk, safety. Safety means security. It means freedom from harm. So that sounds like a really good thing. It's good to be protected from harm. It's good to be in a secure place. And if you're in a safe place, then it's much easier to express yourself. Now, we're in Hungary. I know your history, and you know your history better than I do. There are many countries, historically, in this world, and there are countries still where this happens, where you don't have the safety to express yourself. So safety gives you the ability to express yourself. It gives you opportunities that you don't have when you're in a state of risk and threat. However, swaddling up too much, protecting too much is inhibiting. Actually, it causes stagnation. If you're never able to take a risk, you never learn anything. Just imagine, some of you will have got small children, some of you have children who are older, or remember back to when you were a child. If you'd never been allowed to fall over, you'd never have learnt to walk. It's part of the process. You have to take the risk in order to do the learning. So, what's risk to a tester then? Is it our foe? Is it our enemy? It sometimes feels like that. We talk about reducing risk and preventing risk, or measuring risk. But actually, it helps us focus our testing. So for risk-based testing, if we're taking that approach, risk is not a foe. We use it to make decisions rationally about what we're going to test. It's a friend to us. An understanding of risk is a friend to us. But the understanding is what helps us, because then we know whether we're taking a risk or preventing a risk. What side of that divide are we going? So risk is a friend. And that's very hard, I think, for people with personality types like mine under that DISC profile to accept. That we think we have to make everything safe. So, for example, how many of you have been in the situation where software is due to be released and you feel like you need to do some more testing on that software? That if it goes live, there's going to be problems, and then it's you that's going to be blamed. That happens a lot to testers. But sometimes it's worth examining what is the reason for the push for that software to go live. So a project I was on many years ago when I was a young test manager, one of my first test management roles, it was exactly that point. There was a fixed deadline for releasing the software, and we weren't going to complete all the testing that I thought was necessary. So I thought, I will do a clever thing. I will produce some statistics that show why we need an extra 3 weeks of testing on this project for it to be safe to go live. And I did a calculation based on what defects we'd found so far, what defects predictably might come out of the remaining tests based proportionately on what we'd done so far. And I looked at the types of defects that those might be, and I looked at the type of severity of defects that we'd found so far, and I did some calculations on what the increased support costs were going to be in the first month after go live if we didn't do any more testing. And I went to the project manager and said to him, I don't think we should go live. I've calculated that it's going to cost us this number of pounds if we go live. This is going to be the cost. This is the risk I think we're taking. It's just an estimate, but look how big that amount of money is. I can't remember what it was now. It felt like an absolutely enormous amount of money to me. It was many times the testing budget. Many, many times the testing budget. And he looked at what I'd done and he said, thank you. That's really useful. I'm glad you've done that because you're telling me this is what the support costs extra would be for a month. I'm telling you, if we're a month late, government will fine us 4 times that amount. What you've just told me is what I need to go to the business with to say, this is how much extra support we're going to need in order to not be fined for being late. And they will see that as a bargain. And I was appalled because we weren't going to put perfect software out there. How were we going to do this? This was an appalling thought. And he calmed me down and said, no, you've done the right thing. You've done your job. You've given me information. I can make a business-based financial decision, which is the right one for this organization. This is the right thing to do. And he showed me what we're going to do. We're going to find ways that we can do that support. What will help us? And we did a lot of manual work in that first month to support the operation of the company in being able to deal with that software, to nurse it through that first month. And it worked. And it was a real lesson for me that my risk aversion was not going to stand up to the business's need to take that risk. My job was to give them the information so they could make the right decision. But it's more than that. Risk is a friend to all of us because if we're going to change and grow, we have to take risks. All change carries risk. All change carries risk. So transformations of testing in the business, adopting new methods and approaches like automation or agile, professional development, business transformation, opening new markets, delivering new products, finding new customers. All of those involve taking risks. And the risk of not doing that, not adopting those changes, is much greater. Look at the companies that have now gone out of business because they didn't take the step into new technologies. Kodak, they had a digital camera decades before they came onto the market. They had that technology, and they decided to protect their film business by not putting that digital camera public. They adopted to be safe and stagnate, and as a result, they failed. It's the same for us. Actually adopting change, taking the risk of change, that's our friend. Now, risk is also a foe. We can't just take risks all the time. And I want to share with you here a part of a standard, ISO 25010, which is a standard around quality attributes and how we measure them. And part of that is the part that talks about quality in use, what the software is like for somebody using it. And I just want to draw your attention to this section here that I've highlighted, which is a section called Freedom from Risk. Freedom from risk. Right? And this is exactly sitting in where we, in testing, very often think about risk, that we need to be free of it. And it has 3 parts: economic risk mitigation, health and safety risk mitigation, and environmental risk mitigation. So let's look at those. Economic risk mitigation. If we take too much risk, if our stakeholders take too much risk, there is a danger that they lose money. Financially, companies could be wrecked. People could be sued. Think about the questions this morning about who's responsible if some AI testing goes wrong and somebody dies. Who gets sued? Where's the money? What happens to reputation and marketplaces when people take too much risk? What happened to, I think it was Hoover, when there was the wrong price on a website, on a sale, and they were actually ending up shipping out washing machines at a loss. Too much risk-taking, you lose money. Too little risk-taking, you lose opportunity, like Kodak did. Financially, we have to take risk, and we have to also protect ourselves from risk. And every single organization and every single individual will be in a different place on that sliding scale of how they approach risk, what is suitable. Any of you who have started saving for your pensions, I'm thinking about the age demographic here. Okay, I didn't start with mine till too late. If you're under 40, now's the time to start saving for what you're going to do when you're old, because believe me, you get to 60 and go, oh, where did those decades go? I seem to have no pension. So, but people will start asking you, how much risk do you want to take? Because if you take a higher risk, you'll get a higher return, potentially, but you might get a higher loss. So when you're old, like me and Harry, what you're actually doing with your money is saying, I can conserve this, I will keep it in a safe place, I'm not going to live that much longer. Now, Harry doesn't think that, but maybe I do. And then you spend it very carefully. But when you're young, like these gentlemen and ladies here, then you can gamble on the stock market on the chance that in 20 years' time, that little gamble will have paid off. But it might not. Do you take that risk or not take that risk? All the time, for all of us and for our organizations, that's what we need to do. Let's look at health and safety. Health and safety is tremendously important. I'm old enough to remember the days before there was health and safety legislation in the UK, and people would regularly die because, for example, they fell into vats of chemicals in a chemical plant because there was no guard on them. Yeah? People would die horrible deaths at work because there wasn't safety equipment. And so if we take too much risk, often because we're trying to pursue money or fun, we lose our lives. But the alternative to that is to stay at home and put your head under the duvet and never do anything at all. And you're very welcome to do that. Nice and safe and cozy at home, and never go outside. Actually, that means you've probably got a mental health problem. Genuinely, and I say that as somebody who's had mental health problems which have led me to spend long times under the duvet. And you come out of that and think, what was I doing? It's perfectly safe. Look, I can stand on a stage and nobody's attacking me. You see? So you learn, you come out of it. You have to take the risk in order to learn that lesson. Yeah, we all have to take risks all the time. But again, where are you on that trajectory from too much to too little risk-taking? I mentioned my younger brother, who is the mountaineer. And I remember saying to him one day, I don't really like mountains. I like to keep my feet on the ground. I like to be at ground level. And he said to me, it's all at ground level. It's just at different altitudes and angles. It's a point of view. It's a point of view. What about environmental risk mitigation? If we take too much risk with the environment, and hey, a lot of our applications will be taking environmental risk, using more power and energy than necessary, using scarce resources, actually perhaps going wrong in a way that damages the environment by letting sewage into the sea or making a chemical plant go wrong, we can end up losing our planet. We can end up losing the whole planet. We've only got 12 years now to sort out global warming. You know, there's some things we need to be thinking about. But on the other hand, if we try and preserve everything and we don't change anything and we don't take any risk, we don't build any AI, we don't build any applications, we don't build any buildings and roads, we'll never have done anything. We'll never have done anything. We'll have never made the things that make civilization great. We'd never have books and libraries and paintings and art and science and all the other things that are so valuable. Those things come out of taking risk. Galileo being prepared to stand up and say, this is what I have found out. But notice then, later recanting quickly when threatened. That was a good strategy. I found this out, I don't really believe it. That's what he needed to do because of the regime he was working under. So, what can we do to help us understand risk better? And the theme of the conference sits right with this. Diversity is central to understanding risk, because your risk and your risk and your risk and my risk, like mine and my little brother's, are quite different. We need to have lots of different opinions. So look at things like smart technology. There was somebody talking earlier about Hack My House. And you know, you can see there's benefits and there's dangers. Whose point of view are you looking at? But if you look at something like a smartphone, it might feel like it's a really lovely idea, you know, with your fiance, with your spouse, to share information on your phone so you can always track each other. And that's great. If you make that choice, if you've got the right relationship. But supposing you haven't got the right relationship, supposing something goes wrong, that could actually be dangerous for somebody who's in an abusive relationship or trying to extract themselves from it. It's really important we understand both the benefit and the risk, and we allow people the choice of what they do. This slightly goes on to, I'm doing 2 half keynotes, the other half tomorrow then, well, I'll talk a little bit more about devices. So a diversity of perceptions. And that's not just a diversity of perceptions within the IT team, because we're all much the same as each other, however diverse we think we're being. It's the diversity of opinion that understands all the people who might be affected by what we're doing. So that's ourselves, our teammates, other people in our organization, our customers, the users of the software, the families of all those people, the neighbors of all those people. It trickles and ripples out into society. What is the effect of what we're doing? How do we get that diversity? How do we know when to embrace risk and when to avoid it? Only by asking other people. Because you see, actual risk we don't really understand. We may have some facts and data. We may actually know that there's a risk. But actually quantifying it, understanding it, humans are really bad at understanding risks. Because inside ourselves, we're still those animals back on the savannah. We're still thinking, is that going to eat me or am I going to eat it? That's basically what it comes down to. And the fine-tuning around technology doesn't help us with that. We understand and see little bits of risk. So, from my experiences, my perception of that actual risk is biased. And your experiences will bias your perception of that risk in a different way. And his experiences will bias it in a different way. And her experiences will bias it in a different way. And their experiences, up there at the back, they'll have a different viewpoint again. We're all got different views. We're overlapping. None of us has the complete picture. We're still missing some things. Somehow, by talking with everybody, by listening, listening even more important than talking, we'll get some shared perception of risk. I want to finish by going back to freedom to and freedom from. And I'm thinking about The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Some of you may have read it, some of you may have seen the television series or the film. If you remember, in that book, is there anybody that doesn't know the book, doesn't know the film? There's a few people. Okay, it's a dystopia. It's set in a future USA where evangelical Christians have taken over and women have been completely subjugated. Read it, it's worth reading. One of the things that happens at the beginning of that book is some of the mechanism of subjugating women is through the technology. So that, for example, all women's bank accounts become assigned to their nearest male relative. It's just done through the system. All their bank cards stop working. Suddenly, they're completely reliant on the men around them and the goodwill of those men around them. And then it steps through and different things happen. As part of what's going on, a group of women are taken to be breeding animals, effectively. And when they're being trained into that role, somebody says to them, "We've had freedom to, let's have freedom from." So you had freedom to go out and go to parties and choose your own life and work, and look where it got you. It got you raped, it got you abused. So let's give you freedom from all that danger, and we'll keep you in this tiny, safe, enclosed place where you have no choices, because we will make the choices for you. You will be protected in every way. And yet their situation, once that happens, is so much worse. So do we want to be risk-taking, or do we want to be risk-averse? Who chooses that? Is it us? Are we choosing for other people? How do we make, this is political, but how does this happen? Whose freedom are we thinking about? Whose risk? Whose safety? We have, in this industry, a lot of ethical choices to think about. And as we gaily go around distributing AI and devices and Internet of Things, we need to think about the impact of that. The freedom to have certain things, the freedom to take risks, also the freedom from risk, the freedom to be safe. More on devices tomorrow. Thank you very much.